Good evening.
Hello, everyone. I'm Nayiri from Low Carb and Fasting. Our guest today is Dr. Donal Collins from BarlowCollins Clinic in the UK. Welcome to Low Carb and Fasting.
Thank you, Nayiri. Thank you for having me on. Great honor.
Dr. Collins, no, the honor is ours. So thank you for accepting the invitation, by the way. You've been very busy. You've been very busy recently. But before we talk about all your great activities in the space of low carbohydrate lifestyle and diabetes particularly, please, can you tell our audience about your professional background and what brought you to this space, to the low carbohydrate sort of space?
So my background is 32 years of clinical experience, 27 in the NHS as a GP and 5 years before that as a junior doctor in Ireland. And over the course of my GP career, I got involved in some leadership roles with system transformation. I got involved in a scheme called the Vanguard Scheme, which was designed to try and improve access and prevention for patients. So during that time, it was probably at the peak of my career, when unknown to me, a long-term condition was gradually catching up on me. Ironically, a totally preventable condition, and here was me leading a program of trying to prevent long-term conditions in the NHS. So I can remember at that time I was beginning to feel really tired, really looking forward to going to bed. And I just thought it was the years coming on, and it was also perhaps I was working really hard. And one day I got some bloods done just to make sure there was nothing going on, and much to my shock, my HbA1c was 68 millimoles. Okay, so that's the same. We're talking the same units over there as here. I guess 48 will be diagnosis of diabetes, 41 will be normal. And I found it difficult because suddenly I was the patient. And so I said to myself, I need to do what I tell my patients. So I went to my GP. I got some medications. I was significantly overweight at the time because all the beautiful patients who were happy with whatever we did, they would gift us with cakes, biscuits, sweets. So for many years, I was continually grazing. Every time a cup of tea came, a slice of cake would come, a biscuit would come. And slowly but surely my belly was increasing in size, visceral fat increasing, and obviously going off a metabolic condition. So I took my medication. My GP told me I was overweight and to lose weight. And at that time, there was a leading brand associated with weight loss that the NHS was using, 2 letters and a dot after it. And so I actually brought them into the practice, and I queued up with my patients every Thursday night. And the papers told me that if I lost 5 kilograms, my diabetes control should improve. So having queued up with my patients for 3 months and taking the advice of this leading weight loss program, I did lose 5 kilograms. And I then repeated my bloods, right? And the HbA1c came back at 68. Okay, so that was immensely disappointing. And suddenly I was thinking, oh my God, I'm going to follow the path of many of my patients by just taking increasing numbers of medication. And things will gradually get worse because that's what I've been taught for most of my career. This is a chronic progressive condition. Things will deteriorate. Just keep taking the tablets, try and keep the lid on. and gradually you'll develop complications over time and eventually die prematurely, maybe 12 years before you should. But around that time, two patients came in, both from Southeast Asian background, both with normal BMIs, and both had starting HbA1cs over 100. Okay, so really badly out of control diabetes. And I said to them, you need to go on some medications. And interestingly, both of them were engineers. Both of them said, can you leave me alone and let me see if I can fix it? So they both came back probably about 3 months later, and both HbA1cs had come down into the 70s, right? And I was amazed. I said, "Done amazingly well. Not sure what you've done because you hadn't any weight to lose, but your sugars are much better. But you still have a long way to go. So I still need to give you medications." And then they asked for one more trial of maybe another 6 months, where they said they had partially done what they planned on doing, but they tried to do it properly this time. And when they came back 6 months later, both of them had HbA1cs under 40. Right, and I was absolutely blown away by this. And what was very disappointing then, when I asked them what they did, they said initially they didn't want to tell me because they knew I would say they should stop. It's very dangerous, which for me, I felt disappointed, because then that meant I must be giving across this idea that people can't really talk openly to me, and we can have frank discussion about things. These guys taught me a lot. And of course, as we know, what they did was they removed sugar from their diet, they removed carbohydrates from their diet. And for them, the key thing that they needed to remove was rice and chapatis. And that was the big, so people from that area, particularly who eat a lot of chapatis, apparently chapatis are the last thing that's very hard to give up. And so I looked up this thing called low carb, high fat, to see if there was any evidence, because we've got a wonderful NHS system, and if there's something that's evidence-based, we must be using it. And of course, there was hundreds of papers, loads of trials, loads of evidence. And I was mystified, why aren't we using this? So I said, well, my patients have done this, so I'll do this. And of course, within 3 months, by adding cream to my coffee, 17 kilograms just fell off. All right. My HbA1c came down into the low 40s, so not into the normal range, but stayed there. So effectively, I went into a technical remission from type 2 diabetes.
So what exactly did you do? Obviously, it wasn't just the cream in the coffee, but you lowered your carb. You must have lowered your carbohydrates.
Absolutely. So suddenly, having read all this, you learn where the hidden carbohydrates are, so you just stop them. So essentially, it was omelets in the morning, chicken breasts and salad for lunch, and then maybe steak and cabbage with butter in the evening. Mm-hmm. So I was eating like a king, and eating all this fat that should be killing me, feeling great. Weight was just falling off despite me eating more than I'd ever eaten before. And energy levels were coming back. I was sleeping beautifully and just feeling great in the mornings when I woke up. So then I tried it out with a few of my patients. And again, when patients come in, I'd say, look, we've got two options here. We can give you medications, or we can try and fix root cause. Which would you prefer? And on the whole, 95% would say, let's fix the root cause. And again, dramatic, really fast results were happening. So weight was dropping quickly, sugars were dropping quickly. And when I talked to my colleagues about this, One or two understood it, but the rest said, look, we've got guidelines. This is the way our clinics run. You know, what you're suggesting is not the way our organization is set up. So which was a bit disappointing, to say the least. So it was probably around that time I decided to plan my retirement from the NHS and think of how can we do this at scale. Okay, by scale, I mean getting to hundreds and thousands of patients at the same time. So I approached a number of online platforms to see would they work with me on a population base to offer this to a wide community to see if we can improve a population remotely. Some of them came back and just said you can be a reseller, which isn't quite what I was talking about. But one company that I worked with called Readicare, they were very keen to work with me. And we approached a local practice, which was not my previous practice, in a town called Havant in the south of England, which would be recognized as a very poor socioeconomic demographic, an average reading age of 12. The powers that be and the assumptions are that these people are not digitally literate. Okay, so going in with a remote digital platform couldn't possibly work like this. So when you look at the papers around, there's lots of evidence of early type 2 diabetics that are reasonably well controlled, improving. But what we said is, let's pick a group who have these characteristics of low reading age, poor socioeconomic background, but also very poorly controlled. So let's go for HbA1c's over 75. Let's go for polypharmacy. So 70% of these were on insulin and many other drugs, and multimorbidity. So not just diabetes, but many other conditions as well. So trying to pick a group to prove me wrong, to prove that this really can't be done, and maybe it can be done in the very easy ones. And again, the results were just amazing and better than I could have imagined. But what we did, but the key to this was really the implementation. So it's a bit like if you just give a pill to somebody and don't tell them how it works or why they're taking it, it won't have an impact. And the same is true for what's called a digital therapeutic. So if you're giving a web-based education platform that's going to improve your health, that now is called digital therapeutics. And so what we did initially was to go into this surgery. So we gave 3 weeks of education to all the staff. So that would be managers, admin, reception, practice nurses, diabetic nurses, GPs, anyone who works in the practice. And we also let all of them have access to the platform for free. So everyone in the practice could experience what was happening.
Does that platform still exist? Is it still?
Oh, yes. Yeah. Indeed. And it's doing very well. They're in significant discussions in Australia, in Canada, and in the States, and starting some trials in Ireland as well. But so having convinced the practice, and what was interesting was 2 or 3 of the receptionists, lost a lot of weight. But what surprised everyone was a lot of people who had knee pain suddenly noticed their knee pains weren't there anymore, and they could take a bit more exercise. The lead GP in there, who was significantly obese, lost about 25 kilograms. This is in the time of lockdown, so we used to talk to them a bit like we are, but every week you could see his face shrinking and shrinking and shrinking. And he went from like most of us used to, eating 6-7 times a day, having your snacks and your breakfast and your lunch and your evening meal. He very quickly went to meals a day, not feeling hungry, and he went to 1 meal a day just because he didn't need his breakfast or lunch, and was doing well. And then we invited 100 people to come on this platform, and 40 agreed on it. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to share screen. Right here, so are you seeing that? Home well practice patient study?
Yes.
Excellent. Okay, if I come down here. So these were the outcomes in 4 months. Okay, so you can see here HbA1c dropped by nearly 24%. Weight dropped by an average of 6 kilograms. So obviously BMI came down. Waist circumference dropped by nearly 7 centimeters. And of course, visceral fat is the key to all this. And despite eating a lot of fat, their triglycerides dropped by nearly 16.5%. What was really good was those who were hypertensive and had blood pressures out of control, despite being on usually 3 or 4 antihypertensive medications, their diastolic blood pressure dropped by about 7%, which is really hard to do with medication.
Yes.
And because this is over a 4-month period, so what was an unintended consequence of this was an increase in workload to the diabetic nurse, because she had to keep on taking medication away really fast. So this is the concept of salutogenesis, which is, why don't we treat disease with health rather than treat the symptoms of disease with medication?
Brilliant.
Have you a question?
So this is inspiring and very motivating, I think, for anyone who's listening to us now, who is type 2 diabetic, well, even type 1, or who is hypertensive, to give this a go. We're not saying it will definitely work. It might make some difference in your life, in your health outcomes. But you did say something interesting, and I want to comment on it, because that's one of the saddest part of your story and of my background as well, the secrecy element, patients not opening up or not feeling confident enough to open up to their healthcare professionals about this there's secrecy around the low carbohydrate lifestyle. I certainly kept it secret for a very long time, because when I let it slip from my tongue in my regular visits, I would be dismissed. And so I decided from now on, I'm saying nothing to them. I'm on my own. I'm doing this alone. And although we've come a long way since then, I mean, this is going back 4 or 5 years, but we've come a long way. But a lot of patients are trying to find out what works for them on their own, and it doesn't have to be like that. For me, as a type 1 diabetic, I found out what works for me completely on my own. My diabetes consultant, I don't want to criticize him. This is not a criticism or a judgment. He's a brilliant professional. He's very open now. He's very welcoming of this lifestyle. But I don't think he knows and understands the intricacies, because he hasn't had that training as much as I myself do. So at the end of the day, I still find, even though they're not dismissive of it anymore, but I still find myself completely alone. And this is why, I know I'm deviating from our topic now, but this is why my message to all type 1 diabetics, please join groups on social media where you can meet people who are in the same boat as you. You don't have to be completely on your own trying to figure things out. Reach out to people. Some people may not want to help you, but a lot of people will. And so that's an important message I did want to put out. Low carb and fasting has a specific group for type 1 diabetics on Facebook, but we also have a group on Facebook for general population. So there are many other groups, and certainly Dr. Collins, if you know of any others you'd like to recommend, please go ahead. But you don't have to feel on your own. Reach out to people who are doing the same thing, and every tip you pick up from here and there might actually help you understand what to do better.
I'd fully support that. And I think where the diabetic hospital and consultants are coming from is in medicine and in hospitals, we always fear the bad things. All right. Now, the bad things will be the acute crisis. So a type 1 coming in with a hypoglycemic attack, always considered a failure of medical treatment. So somehow the team will see that as failing. So of course, if you feed them more carbohydrates, that's less likely to happen. But of course, what a lot of people don't recognize is, I'm sorry, I'm going to knock the door. I'm just going to call. That's all right. Thanks. Is that what a lot of people don't recognize is if you eat less carbohydrates, you need less insulin. And if you need less insulin, you will have less hypoglycemic attacks. And your control will be beautifully stable, rather than it swinging up and down. And you're continually chasing the insulin and chasing the carbohydrates. But there are a lot of type 1 diabetics out there who are doing this. Some sadly silently, but in this world of increasing cost of insulin, the cost you'll be spending less, the systems will be spending less, and you will have better control, less side effects, and there is, I can't think of any reason why this shouldn't be offered to everyone, and at least there's a concept called shared decision making.
Yes.
Right, which every clinician should do. So what they should do with any patient in front of you to say, here are all the options, and then you can choose which is the best option for you, based on your priorities in your life and on what matters to you. So the days of paternalistic medicine should be over. Okay, so we should be doing this together as a team. Not me saying to you, I know best, you do what I tell you. So if you hear those messages, something isn't right. All right, and it may be a sign that the clinician is, we're always a bit fearful of going to a place where we have little knowledge.
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yes.
So it's best to say, no evidence there, don't want to talk about that.
My diabetes consultant recently told me, you're doing very well, continue to do what you're doing. I'm sorry, what did he say? I'm sorry, I can't support you any further, but you are doing very well, just continue to do what you're doing. And that to me meant the world. I really wanted to print those words out, put it on the fridge. Someone telling me I'm doing well. I think if you're a patient, regardless of the fact that you are doing well and you can feel it every day, you can feel healthier. But for someone to come along and say, you are doing really well, professional in the field, does make a difference.
It's all about outcomes. So if you're achieving those outcomes, then you're succeeding. So the outcome of a type 1 diabetic is nice normal control, no diabetic retinopathy, normal kidneys, normal blood pressure, no neuropathy, no vascular disease. They're good outcomes.
They're very good outcomes. I have to say, I was probably expected after 40, I forget how many years I've been diabetic, 44 years of having diabetes. I'm expected to have complications, kidney disease or whatnot, but I have none. I don't even have hypertension. I have no complications. So there must be something I'm doing right.
And you know what's interesting is we're seeing things that we never would have believed before. So I've seen a few people who have reversed their diabetic retinopathy. That definitely I would have been told was not possible before. One gentleman, 2 offices away from me, who was due to have laser treatment, and when he went in, the consultant was looking at the notes. He then looked at his eyes again through the slit lamp, went back to the notes, looked at him again, checked it was the right patient. He said, I'm looking at these notes, and these notes say you need laser treatment, but I'm looking in your eyes and there's nothing to laser. You know? So I think this is a story of great hope. And, you know, it's a new dawn of us finding a new therapeutic way of dealing with this condition. Obviously, we got type 1, type 2. You can also mention type 3, but focus on type 1, type 2. But type 2 is just all over the place and expanding enormously. I got a paper recently, I think it was last week, where 1 in 3 teenagers in America are now pre-diabetic.
Yeah.
This is, you know, what are we doing to our children? But on the basis of hope and changing systems, so I'm going to share a screen in a minute to show you what we're doing over here with testing insulin level.
Yes.
And understand what's happening in the body. But last week we had a long conversation with Alder Hay Hospital, which is a huge children's hospital in Liverpool. And they contacted us to have a conversation because they heard testing for insulin. So I thought hospitals would never be interested in. But the consultant was really interested in this and was amazed that we have a point-of-care test. They have lots of children that they bring in for oral glucose tolerance tests. So for your audience, an oral glucose tolerance test is you come in fasting, drink 75 grams of glucose, and then you do a series of blood tests, usually over 2 hours. And you see what happens with sugars. And they said they also do some insulin tests, but it's difficult because you have to keep the blood vial on ice, and then it has to go to a laboratory far away, and there's always the risk of mixing the vials up, getting lost. They thought a point-of-care test could be revolutionary for them, and they've just started what he called a hyperinsulinemic clinic. Right, and this is a clinic for hyperinsulinemia in people who do not have a insulinoma, so they don't have a tumor in their pancreas that's producing insulin. To my mind, and to many on here, they recognize that this is down to our environment and what we eat. Didn't want to go into that conversation with them. But let's see if I can share screen again. Here are 3 point-of-care test machines. So on the left is a Cobas Spear 101, and with the finger prick, you can measure a HbA1c with this. All right. In the middle, you have the Lipid Pro, which can give you a full lipid profile. Again, with 15 microliters of blood, so maybe about 3 or 4 drops. And then the most exciting one for me from a company called Metabolic, based in Holland. This machine measures insulin using lateral flow devices. We've all become familiar with lateral flow devices. They've been tormenting us for the last 2 years. And But what you do is in the well where there's a blue dot, you put 50 microliters of blood, which is probably about 6 or 7 drops. In the packet, there's a pipette that gets you the right amount. And then 4 drops of buffer. Then you wait 15 minutes. And at 15 minutes, you pop it into the bottom of the machine. And then it gives you a number. As you can see on the screen, insulin 49.4. And what you can do over time is a bit like the oral glucose tolerance test, is then measure what happens to the insulin over the next 3 or 4 hours with multiple readings. This is the sort of outcome you can get. So here's an insulin sensitive curve. So you get a glucose that rises. The glucose is on the right-hand side, insulin on the left-hand side. Gold is glucose, green is insulin. And the glucose goes up, comes down, a small spike from the insulin, everything under control. So the key here is the insulin doesn't go above 30 and everything is sorted out within an hour and a half. So a small amount of area under the curve. To show you a difference, here's an insulin resistant one. So again, you can see the sugars are on the left, insulin numbers on the left, glucose on the right. And you can see that the glucose numbers go really high. Then in this one, the insulin response goes up to about 180 picounits. So reducing nearly 7 times what the other one does. And even after 2 hours has not come down to a normal level. So we can see here, the area under the curve is huge compared to the person. So while this is both, I think this is both bad and good. So it's saying you're insulin resistant, but the beauty is the solution is so easy. Now you know, every time you look at a plate of food, see this graph. And every time you eat something at breakfast, lunch, then in the evening, you're going to be perpetually under the curve here, which means you will always be in fat storage mode. You'll be increasing your fatty liver, increasing the weight, increasing your blood pressure, increasing the abnormal lipid. So it empowers people then to make a decision when every time they put a plate of food in front of them, they'll say, what's this going to do to my curve? And then at least it's an informed decision rather than a decision that was based on, sadly, our healthy eating guidelines. But now we've got a tale of hope. So I'm going to introduce you to Matt. Now, Matt is 59 and he has had type 2 diabetes for maybe 17, 18 years. And has been struggling. His blood sugars were out of control. And when we met him, his HbA1c was 95. He would finger prick, his blood glucose would typically be at 22, 23 millimoles, right? And awful. So when we met him initially, we got him onto the ReadyCare program. So he went on online program. And after 4 months, his HbA1c came down to 78. We were pleased. He wasn't, because he wanted to get it into non-diabetic levels. He said, you guys, you're not helping. So I said, well, hold on, Matt. I said, when you were doing finger pricks, it was in the mid-20s. Now when you're doing finger pricks, it's in the teens. So it's an improvement. I agree, it's not the best. So he said he wanted to understand what was going on, and he came over and we did a curve. We have here is after 4 months of low carb with a HbA1c now of 70. And his fasting glucose when he came in was 16. His fasting insulin was about 7 or 8. I think that is when we gave him the sugar. And his glucose rose to just under 30 okay, and just stay there for hours. But his insulin response was just pathetic, all right? The highest it went to was 16. And you can see the insulin-resistant person went up to 180. So I'd have expected a huge insulin response for this. So Matt recounted afterwards that I called him a tired old donkey climbing a mountain, but I was trying to describe his pancreas. You know, it had fallen over, it was exhausted. After many years of overworking, it just couldn't do it. So based on this, he essentially had two options. You're not producing enough insulin, get some insulin injections. That was a red line, because whatever happened, he didn't want to put on weight. And he said, there must be some. I asked if he could try some fasting and going to 1 meal. He thought about it and he said he'd give it a try. So he said the first 3 days he found difficult. By the end of the week, he said it was really easy. My body had adjusted. And in 2 weeks, he said, my finger pricks now in single figures. Quite extraordinary. And then 8 months later, he contacted me because he regularly wears CGMs, continuous glucose monitors. And he said, an interesting thing is beginning to happen. He said, when I eat something I shouldn't, the sugars go up. Normally they would stay up for 3 or 4 hours. But now he said they're rapidly coming down again. Mm-hmm. So I said, oh, that's interesting. So something's changing. Why don't we have another look? So he came in and we repeated his curve. And the gold line this time only goes up to 20, which is the glucose. Previously it went up to 30. This time he's getting a really big insulin response. So look at it, it's nearly hitting 90. Previously he was only going 60. Here's an example of pancreatic recovery, producing more insulin after a pancreatic failure event. It's really extraordinary. So we've shared this, Ben Bickman and Tim Noakes, and they're completely blown away by this. And so I think for everyone on this call, this is really a message of hope. And so no matter where you are in your journey, you can turn things around. And there was always hope, persisting. And just for dramatic effect, these are the two curves overlaid. So you can see the dense line at the top is the recovered pancreas. And it's actually the green dotted line underneath is the previous insulin response to the same.
So a quick question, if you don't mind, Dr. Collins. So is he now producing more insulin according to these graphs he is, or is he more responsive, or his body is more responsive to the insulin which the pancreas is producing? But it looks like he is producing more insulin. So how can that be better health-wise?
So he was an end-stage type 2.
Right.
Okay, so his pancreas had been crushed with visceral fat. He previously would have been insulin resistant. So it's like asking a 100-meter sprinter to, run a half a mile with a big millstone wrapped around his neck. Okay, and do that every day for 5 years. You will destroy anyone by taking the millstone off his neck, right? Suddenly you can perform amazingly well. But so I think what's happening here is, one is you've given the pancreas a rest, given the cells a chance to recover. Once he went to fasting and 1 meal a day, he started losing some weight again. So he was reducing his visceral fat and probably reducing some of the fat that was packed in the pancreas. The beta cells are no longer getting squashed and squeezed, and they're able to, if you like, breathe again. But I think what would be really fascinating again, and he's agreed to come back in about 8 months and stay on the fasting and 1 meal a day. And I think we may well get a normal curve. We may get a normal glucose response then. We may say, you know what, Matthew, you are no longer type 2 diabetic.
That's amazing. That is just so full of hope, this message. And it may work for you if you are type 2 diabetic. If you are type 1 diabetic, it will work differently, but still, it's worth giving it a go. If you've tried eating low carbohydrate meals and you did not find them appetizing or even satiating, then you can always choose to go back to your carbs. But I think most people who give it a go are actually shocked, surprised, pleasantly surprised how full they feel and how actually not deprived of food. That feeling of food deprivation is just not there anymore.
I would describe it as liberation.
Liberation. Mm-hmm.
I mean, certainly that's how I felt. I was liberated from overwhelming hunger.
Mm-hmm.
And certainly those of us who lived with diabetes or being obese, that driving hunger, unless you've experienced, you can't imagine what it's like. So when you sit with somebody at the same dinner table and they're full after what they've eaten, and you're sitting there thinking, I could eat another 2 or 3 of these, you know, how is that possible? And suddenly to have that lifted off your shoulders, it was just wonderful.
Yes, it gives you, I think, liberating for a type 1 diabetic as well. I mean, for me, having that roller coaster of high and low, highs and lows all throughout the day and completely erratic. And I used to be told to be more clever and smart with my pump. I have an insulin pump with my pump options. And I remember my diabetes nurse telling me, Nayiri, you have to be more proactive. And it hurt. I was a carb eater. I couldn't have been more proactive. I cooked everything at home. I made bread at home. I used the best quality flour that I could find. I paid a fortune for good ingredients. I thought they were healthful ingredients. I could not bring my HbA1c down. I ate constantly. I was feeding on carbohydrates, and no matter what option I used on my pump, extended bolus and quick acting, nothing seemed to work. I could not bring my HbA1c down, and to be told I had to be more proactive was quite hurtful. I haven't forgotten that. That was many years, but I have not forgotten that, because you cannot be smart with that kind of regimen. If you're just feeding yourself carbohydrates, as Dr. Bernstein says, if you're eating low carbohydrate diet, your margin of error is always small. So your elevations will be small and non-significant, but to actually rise to 22 after pasta meal and then drop 2 hours later, and then have to eat again, that roller coaster was a nightmare to deal with. I don't get that anymore. It doesn't mean I don't get highs and lows, but my highs never exceed 8 millimoles. So it's a much better, much more comfortable and relaxing and liberating sort of place to be.
The GP in the UK called Ian Lakes.
I've interviewed him on these channels. For anyone who's interested in type 1 stuff specifically, we talked about type 1 diabetics who fast and who also feed themselves on low carbohydrate diet. Please find the video, and I'll actually put it in the link below as well. Yeah, put the link below. So
again, he's brilliant. He's very knowledgeable, and he explains things beautifully.
Absolutely. So what are you involved with at the moment? What are you trying to achieve? You've obviously sent the results to Dr. Beckman, and did you say Professor Tim Noakes as well in South Africa? So where are we hoping to go from here?
So at the moment in the UK, I'm the only one measuring insulin levels. All right. What we would hope is that there would be 30 or 40 people around the country measuring insulin levels, and many more around the world. So anyone who has an interest in this, the company Metabolic, are very keen to have more and more sites around. And so the device, if I just show you, got one here. Absolutely, see if I can get it on the screen. So that's what it looks like. Okay, and then the screen there. Okay. We called it Aristotle because we started with the alphabet. Think of something nice with the beginning A. I've got another one over there called Bacchus because apparently I like my red wines. And they're beautifully simple to use. And it's point of care testing, so it means anyone can do this. So it's outside the regulator. The only time the regulator is involved if you're doing venesection and sending blood to laboratory. So this is similar to you doing a glucometer reading. The same would apply with the lipids. So if you're going to set up a diabetes remission service, you effectively can have your own laboratory on your desk using these machines. And then using myself and Gabor behind this, we can add some advice on what do the graphs really mean, knowing what the context is.
We're referring here to, that's a message for our audience, to Dr. Gabor Erdozi. Please tell us more about him and how you're cooperating with him.
So Gabor is the brains behind Metabolic. Okay. So as we know, Gabor, his main job is reading about 4 or 5 scientific papers a day. He gathers immense amounts in his head. So what we're doing with them is collaborating to produce real-world evidence for this. And we're now at the stage where we're looking for other people with an interest, be they clinicians, be they nutritionists, dietitians, anyone with an interest in this area. Because ideally what we'd like is anyone who'd like to get a insulin measurement be one of these sites within 100, so it can be easy to access. So that's our hope and ambition. And on the other side is using a digital platform. Before I fully retire, I would like to hit 1 million people in diabetic remission.
What a great goal. That's a great goal. So these devices or these machines, how easy would it be for the NHS? How costly would it be for the NHS to invest in those and make them available in clinics, or at least in more hospitals than they are available in at the moment?
Yeah. So the cost of the machine is roughly £9,000 or £10,000. Okay. Cost of a lateral flow device is about £6. But I think what Metabolic are trying to do is to develop a service contract. So it's a bit like when you do your mobile phone, you pay the annual contract rather than buying the phone up front. So we spread the cost out over many years. But in NHS terms, this is a drop in the ocean. We will spend on new medications £30 to £35 a month on each new drug that we add on to somebody's bill. And this is a mechanism for taking away expense or never starting. So the cost saving meant. And in terms of understanding what's happening and using preventative medication, taking a salutogenesis approach. Let's introduce health. Let's not just treat symptoms. medications, this is a fundamental armament to have in your to use. And it certainly revolutionized my career, and it's also great fun. And, sitting here, you can sit here for 3-4 hours with a patient client, or even a number of people. And then, the question is always, what happens if the next one is higher? And you can say, well, let's think about that. What are the things that might drive it higher? And then what does it mean if in 6 months you flatten the curve into a normal range? How much you feel then?
Yes. Well, it's been a fascinating talk. So how do people sign up to the digital platform, and what sites can people visit online?
Okay, so ReadyCare is spelled REDICARE, based in Ireland, so it'll be .ie. All right, so that's readycare.ie, and they can actually contact them directly to access online programs. Metabolic has a website called metabolic.org, so it'll be METERBOLIC.org, and that will give you information about the machinery. If anyone is based in the UK and they want to see how it works, I'd be delighted for people to come visit and have a look, and even see it in action in the clinic.
And if any patient wants to visit you, where can they find you, Dr. Collins?
So I'm based in a town called Leon Solent in Hampshire in the UK, and our website is BarlowCollins, BarlowCollins.co. And again, we can talk to people in the clinic or remotely now, but obviously remotely we won't be able to do any insulin testing.
And that's a private clinic, not NHS funded. We need to mention that too. Yes.
Well, it's both. So the ReadyCare we're trying to deploy into primary care networks through an NHS contract. We have one contract. We hope to have about 12 contracts in 12 months. Want to get the health coach can manage about 700 or 800 people at a time on this platform. So you can really manage lots of people. Yeah, I think the insulin testing for the moment will probably be a private service, though the hospital is really keen to bring it into their pediatric hyperinsulinemic clinic, obesity clinic, and one of the female pediatricians has lots of teenagers with polycystic ovaries.
And hopefully you'll come to the diabetes clinic as well. That will make the biggest impact. Thank you so much for your time today and for this fascinating discussion. I'm sure our audience will appreciate the talk. I will put all the links that we mentioned in the description below the video. Dr. Collins, any final words to our audience?
Hope. There's always hope. We can always make things better with understanding, with humility, and with vulnerability. That's how we will progress.